Hello, everyone. My name is Ketan, and I'm the faculty of Indian Economy at UPSCprep.com and the author of Indian Economy Handbook. Now, in this video, we are going to look at one of the favorite topics of UPSC, especially from prelims point of view, that is the budget. Now, for convenience, I divided this video into three parts. In part one, we'll look at the theory. Now, I assume that every one of you has already studied at least one standard book and has some idea about the budget. But nonetheless, we'll quickly go through it. In part two, we'll look at some of the numbers and some of the trends with respect to the latest budget that was announced on February 1st, 2024. And in part three, we'll look at some of the major highlights of the budget. Now let's look at the theory. Now, first thing first, why does the government need to present a budget in the parliament? Now, the government needs to present the budget in the parliament because there are certain constitutional provisions that mandates that, right? So there is Article 112, which says that the president shall, in respect of every financial year, cause to be laid before Parliament annual financial statement. Now, this annual financial statement is nothing but the budget. Then there is Article 265, which provides that no tax shall be levied or collected except by authority of law. So even if the government wants to levy some new taxes, that the government has to go to the Parliament to get its approval. Then there is Article 266, which provides that no expenditure can be incurred except with the authorization of the legislature. So अगर government को कोई खर्चा करना है, so even then they have to go and get approval of the parliament. So because of all these provisions, it becomes mandatory for the government to present a budget in the parliament, right? Now, next, what is an interim budget? Now, we all know that this year the government has presented an interim budget. Now, interim budget क्यों? Because this is an outgoing government. The government has a mandate for 5 years. Now, this is the 5th year of the government. The general elections are due. So it would not be very ethical for the outgoing government to present a full-fledged budget for the next one financial year, right? So that is a job for the new government that will come after the general elections. So अभी government एक interim budget present करती है. Now the function of the interim budget is to ensure the continuity of the government expenditure and some essential services. तो continuity maintain करने के लिए the government presents the interim budget. Now in this interim budget, the government will not announce not do any major announcements, because if the government does any populist announcement, then that may affect the results of the elections, right? So we do not want that. So because of all these reasons, an interim budget is presented. Now, when the new government comes in power and takes office, then it is free to present a full-fledged budget, which it will usually do in around June or July. Okay. So who prepares the budget? So the nodal body responsible for presenting the budget is the Finance Ministry. Now, within the Finance Ministry, there is Department of Economic Affairs, and within the Department of Economic Affairs, there is the Budget Division, which has the responsibility for preparing the budget. Now, when is the budget presented? So every year, the budget is presented on 1st of February by the Finance Minister. Now, earlier, the budget used to be presented on the last day of February, but that system was changed right around, I think, 2016. Uske baad se every year, the budget is presented on 1st of February. So when the finance minister presents the budget in the parliament, there is obviously the budget speech, but along with the budget speech, the finance minister also presents a list of budget documents to the parliament. Now, these budget documents are mandated by the various provisions of the constitution and under provisions of the FRBM Act, which is the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, which was enacted in 2003. So let's look at them one by one. The first one is the annual financial statement mandated by Article 112 of the Constitution. Now, the annual financial statement has estimates of revenue and expenditure that is incurred by the government. So the government will usually present figures for 3 financial years. So for example, in the current budget, the government will present the budget estimates for the next financial year, that is 2024-25. But the government will also present the revised estimates for the present financial year, that is 2023-24. And then the government will also present the actual figures, that is known as actuals, for financial year 2022-23, right? So as you can see that for every financial year, the estimates of revenue and expenditure undergo 3 transitions. So first there will be budget estimate. Then after 1 year, these budget estimates, in light of the actual expenditure that is being done, there will be a revised estimate, which is the RE, right? And then after 1 year, the government will have the actual numbers, right? Which is known as actuals. Okay. Then the next budget document presented by the finance minister is the demand for grants, mandated by Article 113. Now, under the demand of grants, the government seeks to get parliament approval for the various expenditure plans of the government across different sectors, across different ministries, right? And then third is the finance bill mandated by Article 110A of the Constitution. Now, in the finance bill, it contains the government proposals for various new taxation that the government proposed to levy on its people, or changes in tax laws or other revenue generations. And again, this also needs parliamentary approval, right? Then there is a list of documents mandated by the FRBM Act. Now, the FRBM Act was enacted in 2003 to ensure fiscal discipline by the government. Because what happens is sometimes the government may get carried away, would like to, कुछ populist measures enact करना चाहेंगे that will really mess up with the fiscal discipline of the country. So that is not required. So this FRBM Act was enacted to ensure fiscal discipline so that there is prudent management of the public finances. Now, within this FRBM Act, the government gets certain targets with respect to fiscal deficit or debt levels. Now, all these ensures that there is transparency. In the provisions of the FRBM Act, the government is required to again present macroeconomic framework statement and medium-term fiscal policy strategy statement to the parliament. So next, let's look at the structure of the budget. So the budget is broadly divided into the revenue budget and the capital budget. Now, the revenue budget deals with the recurring day-to-day expenditures of the government, whereas the capital budget, there is increase or decrease in the assets and liabilities of the government, right? We'll see this more in detail. So the revenue budget is further subdivided into the revenue receipts and revenue expenditure. And similarly, the capital budget is again divided into capital receipts and capital expenditure. So receipts is your incoming money and expenditure is the outgoing money of the government. So coming to receipts, we already know that the receipt is divided into revenue receipt and capital receipt, right? So the revenue receipt is further subdivided into tax revenue, which is again divided into direct tax revenue and indirect tax revenue and non-tax revenue, right? So in direct tax revenue receipts, government receives income through all the direct taxes like the income tax or the corporate tax or minimum alternative tax. Whereas in the indirect tax revenue, the government earns money through the indirect taxes like your GST or excise duty or custom duty, right? In the non-tax revenue, again, these are recurring incomes that the government earns through license fees, fines, like your traffic signal fines, various permits that the government gives. So there is a fee involved in that. All these are non-tax revenues of the government. Now coming to the capital receipts. So again, capital receipts, it is divided into debt capital receipts and non-debt capital receipts. So as the word suggests, debt capital receipts increases the debt of the government. So this is the money that the government is borrowing and is obligated to pay back, right? So again, the debt capital receipts can be divided into internal, when the government borrows from internal sources like your banks or private sector or households, individuals, or external, when the government borrows from external sources like your bilateral loans from maybe Japan or South Korea or America, or multilateral loans like from IMF, World Bank, other regional development banks, right? So these are debt capital receipts. Whereas the other part is the non-debt capital receipts, in which the government is not obligated to pay back. So maybe the government will do disinvestments, sell part of some of the PSUs or sell the whole of the PSUs like with Air India. So whatever money that the government garners from that comes into the non-debt capital receipts. Okay. Now, next coming to the budget expenditures. Now the budget expenditure is again divided into revenue expenditure and capital expenditure, right? Now, the revenue expenditure is the regular day-to-day recurring cost of the government. For example, the salaries of the government employees or certain other operational expenses of the government. These are revenue expenditures of the government. Whereas capital expenditures are expenditure made by the government to increase their assets, right? So construction of road, railways, bridges, schools, hospitals, all these are capital expenditures of the government. Now, next look at the various types of deficits. Now, the government will always want to present a balanced budget. लेकिन कई बार obviously कुछ differences रह जाते हैं in the total expenditure of the government and the receipts of the government. So the difference between the expenditure and receipts is calculated into various types of deficits. So let's see one by one what they are. The first one is fiscal deficit, which is total expenditure minus total receipts, excluding the borrowings. So important to note here कि borrowings को count नहीं कर रहे हैं, which in essence makes it the fiscal deficit becomes the measurement of total borrowing requirements of the government. Right. The next is revenue deficit, which is revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. So we are just looking at the revenue side of the budget. Next is effective revenue deficit, which is revenue deficit minus grants for creation of capital assets. So these grants are given to the states for creation of capital assets. So in a way, this money is being used for creation of assets, right? So this is in a way a kind of useful expenditure. तो उसको minus कर देते हैं revenue deficit से to calculate effective revenue deficit. And the fourth one is primary deficit, which is fiscal deficit minus interest payments. So what happens is that the government has to pay interest on the debt that it has taken in the past years. Now the government cannot do anything about it, right, in the present year, because that is an obligation for the government. So a primary deficit calculate किया जाता है, where they subtract the interest payments from fiscal deficit, and this primary deficit the government tries to bring down to a very low level, almost equal to zero. Right. So these are the various types of deficits. All right, let's now look at the numbers and trends with respect to the current budget. Right. So we start with doing a comparison between the Indian economy and the world economy. So as you can see from this graph, right around this time, the world economy and also the Indian economy faced a lot of challenges. There was COVID, then there was the Russia-Ukraine war, which led to a lot of supply chain disruptions across the world. Then there was monetary tightening by the major banks from Europe and America, a lot of other disturbances in the world economy. And because of that, a lot of fluctuations happened in the growth rate. But now you see the Indian economy is growing at a much faster rate than the world economy. In fact, India is the fastest growing major economy in the world. So in this scenario, let's analyze the various numbers that were presented in the budget, right? So if we look at the numbers, in the revenue side, our total revenue receipts was around 30 lakh crore. Now, this is the income the government is earning from both its tax revenues and non-tax revenues. So tax revenues, say, a big chunk of money is coming from tax revenue, right? So around 26 lakh crore is coming from tax revenues. Non-tax revenues like fees, permits, fines, वहां से 4 lakh crore आ रहा है. Then the capital receipts, the government is earning is around 17.6 lakh crore. Now, within this capital receipts, the debt capital receipts is the major chunk. तो जो government debt ले रही है from internal sources and external sources, that is around 16.8 lakh crore, right? Now, within also this 16.8 lakh crore, the major chunk is internal debt. So internal debt is around 95% and external debt is around 5%. So this is good for the Indian economy because the major source of debt for the government is internal. So it is not getting affected by a lot of international currency fluctuations, right? Now the non-debt capital receipts is around 79,000 crore. This is the money the government has received by selling its stakes in various PSUs, doing disinvestment, divestments, etc. Right? Now coming to the expenditure sides, the revenue expenditure is around 36.5 lakh crore. This is the money the government is spending in its day-to-day functional activities like salaries of government employees or other operational costs of the government. And then the capital expenditure, which is 11,111 crores. Now the major focus of the government is in increasing this amount, right? The government wants to spend more and more in capital expenditure because capital expenditure leads to increase in the assets of the government. So government wants to build a lot of roads, railways, other infrastructures, hospitals, schools, etc. Right? So a lot of focus is here. Now let's look at some of the trends with respect to receipts and expenditure. So as you can see, the first graph is revenue receipts. Now the revenue receipts, the government is growing. Now the revenue receipts is the major chunk of revenue receipts comes from tax revenue receipts, right? So we can see that the amount of money that the government is getting through taxes is increasing. Now, this increase has happened even though the government has not really increased the tax rates in the country. So which means that our economy is actually tax buoyant. Tax buoyancy means that the tax collection of the government is increasing through increase in tax compliance and increase in tax base, right? So the government is witnessing more tax collection through GST or income tax or corporate tax, and that's it's why the revenue receipts of the government is growing. Now, next is capital receipts. Now, the capital receipts is both debt capital receipts and non-debt capital receipts. Now, obviously, the government would not want to accumulate too much debt, and that is why we see that there is a decline in the amount of capital receipts of the government, which is a good sign. Next is the trend with respect to the expenditure. Now we see that the revenue expenditure of the government is growing. Now the revenue expenditure is day-to-day recurring expenditure of the government. So this is the expenditure that the government has to do. So as the government grows, the revenue expenditure also grows. Next, we see the trend with respect to effective capital expenditure. Now, effective capital expenditure is capital expenditure, that is CapEx, plus the grants given by the center to the states for creation of capital assets, right? So grants to states for creation of capital assets. So a big focus of the government of India is to increase the effective capital expenditure. So as we can see, the overall trend is towards increasing effective capital expenditure. Next, let's look at the deficit trends. So as you can see, right around this time, this was the COVID period where the government of India had to take up a lot of debt to provide fiscal stimulus to the Indian economy. And this has really increased the deficits. But now the government of India is on the path towards fiscal consolidation. The deficits has been decreasing. So there is a continuous trend of decreasing the fiscal deficit. The revenue deficit is decreasing. Effective revenue deficit, the primary deficit, all has been decreasing. The government of India have a target to decrease it further to 4.5%, right, by 2025-26. Next is the trend in tax receipts. So as you can see, the government of India has managed to collect taxes equivalent to around 11.7% of the GDP, which is a good sign. At least in the recent year, you can see there is increase in the tax to GDP ratio. The recommended tax to GDP ratio as recommended by the World Bank is around 15%. So still a lot to do for the country. And for the wealthier nations or the advanced nations like USA or some European countries, this goes as high as 25 to 30%. And higher the tax to GDP ratio is the indicator of the wealth or prosperity of the nation, right? So still India has a long way to go, but the trend is towards increasing tax to GDP ratio. Now this graph shows the trend in net receipts of the center. So the total accumulation of tax revenue, non-tax revenue, as well as non-debt capital receipts, right? So as you can see, the trend is towards increasing net receipts for the center. Now a large chunk of center's revenue comes from this blue bar, that is tax revenue, right? And that is why a lot of focus of the government is towards increasing the tax base, increasing tax compliance. And for that, government बहुत सारे tax reforms लेके आती है. Now, apart from that, the non-tax revenue is also growing, and the non-debt capital receipts, which is the amount government receives from disinvestments and selling of its stocks and selling of its property. तो वहाँ पे ज़्यादा wiggle room नहीं होता है government के पास. So right around 0.8 lakh crores government gets from there. All right. The next chart is the trend in capital expenditure. Now, this is a big focus point for the government because the government wants to increase its capital expenditure or CapEx. So as you can see, the blue bar is the capital expenditure, which was 11,111 crores. And apart from that, the blue bar is the grant in aid for creation of capital assets. This is the grant given to states. So the effective capital expenditure is around 15 lakh crore. And the trend is towards exponential increase in the capital expenditure. Now, the next graph shows the trend of major items of expenditure. So this shows that where the government focus lies. किस sector में सबसे ज़्यादा government expenditure कर रही है. So as you can see, the most of the expenditure, the maximum amount of expenditure is in transport. So a lot of focus in building roads, railways, civil aviation, airports, and all that, right? So यहाँ पे सबसे ज़्यादा expenditure हो रहा है. Then rural development is another big focus area of the government. Agriculture and allied sector is another big focus area of the government. तो यहाँ पे काफी ज़्यादा expenditure हो रहा है. But apart from that, there is also increase in expenditure in education, health, energy, and social welfare. Okay, now this is a pie chart showcasing that where the government of India is spending its money, right? तो जितना भी पैसा आ रहा है उसमें पैसा खर्च कहाँ हो रहा है. So as you can see, a big portion of the government, अगर government of India 1 रुपये खर्चा कर रही है, तो right around 20 paisa is going on interest payments, right? And that is why it is important for the government to decrease its debt, क्योंकि debt कम होगा तो debt में interest भी कम होगा. Right around 20 paisa is just going on interest payments for previous debts that the government has taken, right? Around 16 paisa goes for central sector schemes, 8 paisa for defense subsidies, another expenditure that the government wants to curtail, right? तो वहाँ पे 6 पैसा जा रहा है. Finance Commission and other transfers of finance commissions devolves the total tax revenues among the states. तो वहाँ पे 8 पैसा खर्चा हो रहा है. State share of taxes around 20 paisa. So another big chunk. Pensions में 4 paisa. Central sponsored scheme is 8 paisa. So you can see wherein all the money is going, right? And where is the money coming from? How is the government of India earning? So as you can see, another big chunk of government income is from borrowing, right? So government is taking up debt. So around 20 paisa the government has to borrow. Now this is from both internal and external sources. So around 95% internally, 95%, and external is around 5%. So a large chunk of money that the government is borrowing is from internal sources, which is actually a stabilizing factor for the government, right? Then next is income tax. Income tax around 19 paisa government is earning. Corporation tax is around 17 paisa. GST is around 18 paisa. So similar amount of money from these tax sources. Apart from that, you have your union excise duty and customs, where you get 5 paisa and 4 paisa respectively. And from non-tax receipts, which is your fines or your fines, receipts, permits, right? So that is 7 paisa, and your non-debt capital receipts is your disinvestments from PSUs, around 1 paisa. So this is the source of all the incoming money for the government. All right, next let's look at some of the focus area and major highlights of the budget. So the theme of this budget was Viksit Bharat by 2047. So the government of India wants to transform India into a developed country by the year 2047, right? Now, how does the government of India want to do this? Through this development mantra, which is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas. So the government wants to exploit the trinity of demography. So India is a very young country, so that India can make use of this fact and skill its youth population and achieve high rates of economic growth, right? To achieve through demography, through democracy and diversity, right? So India does not just want to become a very rich nation, but India also wants to become an inclusive nation. So the richness, the fruits of growth should accrue to all sections of the society in all parts of India, right? Now, the government has given a major focus on these 4 demographics, that is the poor, women, youth, and farmers. So let's look at some of the initiatives of the government of India, which is directed towards these 4 demographics. The first one is government initiatives towards the poor. Here, the government has introduced direct benefit transfer. We all know about it. So the various benefits of various government schemes and programs are directly transferred into the bank accounts of the poor, right? And this has led to savings of around 2.7 lakh crore. Now, here I want to state that the numbers are not that important. You can skip the numbers, but just try to know what are the various government initiatives, right? Because that are important for the exam. Now, second, another important data has come out that around 25 crore people has moved out of multidimensional poverty. So multidimensional poverty index measures the levels of poverty in India. And as per the report, a huge chunk of Indian population has come out of poverty. So that is a big positive point for the government. Next is PM Swanidhi. PM Swanidhi is a loan dispersal program of the government where they give collateral-free loans to the street vendors, right? So यहाँ भी काफी काम हुआ है. Next demography is the youth. Now, for the youth, a lot of focus is towards skilling the youth. For that, the government has introduced Skill India Mission, जिसके अंदर बहुत सारी training मिलती है. And for fostering the entrepreneurial aspirations of the youth, they are also given loans under PM Mudra Yojana. Under this scheme, there are three types of loans that are disbursed. That is Shishu, Kishore, and Tarun. Right, and depending on at which stage is your entrepreneurial venture, you can apply for Sishu loans, which is around 50,000 you can get. For Kishore, around 5 lakh you can get, and for Tarun, up to 10 lakh loans you can get. Then another another initiative of the government is PM Shri, which is towards education, right? PM Shri stands for Pradhan Mantri Schools for Rising India. Now, these schools will act as model schools, which other schools can emulate. Now, there is also a lot of focus on increasing the engineering colleges. So IITs, many IITs have been established, AIMS have been established, various universities have been established. So all these are being done by the government for the youth. The next demography is the farmers or the Andata. Now, for the farmers, the government has introduced PM Kisan. Under PM Kisan, farmers are given direct financial assistance. So every year, around 6,000 rupees is deposited into the accounts of these farmers. Right? Then there is PM Fasal Bima Yojana, which is a crop insurance scheme. There is ENAM, or Electronic National Agriculture Market, where the farmers can, auction their agriculture produce and get good prices for their produce. Now, the next demography is the women. For women, again, the government has Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, where they disperse loans to women entrepreneurs. The female enrollment in higher education has increased by 28% in 10 years. So more and more females are opting for higher education. There is 43% female enrollment in STEM courses. Now, these STEM courses stand for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics courses. Now, earlier, these courses were largely opted by the males, but now we see that there is more and more female enrollment in these courses, which is a very encouraging sign. Now, again, the government has assisted 1 crore women to become Lakpati Didis, right? So Lakpati Didis are members of the self-help groups who have an annual income of greater than 1 lakh. So the government encourages more and more women to become Lakpati Didis, and they do so by imparting skill or giving various kinds of assistance. So from the data published, we can see that there has been a rise in female labor force participation, right? So in 2022-23, 37% of the female population has participated in the labor force, which is a very encouraging sign. Women form 50% of our population, and if more and more women are participating in the labor force, then that is a very good sign for the economy. Next is the strategy for Amrit Kaal. Now, Amrit Kaal is the euphemism used by our government for indicating the India's bright future, right? So what are we doing to ensure the bright future of India? Number one is sustainable development. Now, for sustainable development, we have committed to meet net zero by 2070. That means that will reduce our net carbon emission to zero by 2070. For that, we are doing viability gap funding for wind energy, setting up coal gasification and liquefaction capacity. We are adopting blending of CNG, PNG, and compressed biogas in a phased manner. Financial assistance is given for procurement of biogas segregation machinery. Now, also there is initiative for rooftop solarization, where a household which has rooftop solar panels can obtain up to 300 units of free electricity per month. Then a large focus is on adoption of e-buses for public transport. There is strengthening of e-vehicle ecosystem so that more and more people can switch to green vehicles or e-vehicles. The government is doing this by supporting various manufacturing capacities, various charging points in the cities. Then the government has also announced a new scheme for biomanufacturing and biofoundry, right, to support environmental friendly alternatives for fuel. Now, these new schemes are generally announced by the government during the budget, but the details of it come out later. So, the scheme has been announced, लेकिन उसका detail बाद में आएगा, right? So keep an eye out for this. Also, if you look at the percentage of non-fossil fuel installed electricity capacity, then you'll see this trend that the capacity for non-fossil fuel installed electricity is increasing in India, right? There is a lot of focus on LPG connections under Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. Then a lot of LED bulbs, LED tube lights, energy efficient fans are being distributed under Ujjala, which is Unnat Jyoti by affordable LEDs for all, right? तो बहुत सारे LEDs distribute किया जा रहा है. Then a lot of LED street lights are being installed under SNLP, which is Street Lighting National Program. A lot of initiatives by the government. Now, a big focus of the government is, of course, in infrastructure and investment, as we already saw through increase in capital expenditure by the government. So what is the various initiatives that the government has taken here? The first one is PM Gati Shakti, which is the national master plan for multimodal connectivity, right? So a lot of roads, railways, navigation routes are being developed under PM Gati Shakti to improve logistic efficiency and reduce the cost of transportation of goods and services. Then there is a lot of promotion for foreign investments via bilateral investment treaties, which are negotiated by the government with other countries. So a lot of FDI is coming in India and is being invested in India. Then there is initiatives toward expansion of existing airports, as well as building of new airports under Udan scheme, which is Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik scheme, right? Then there is promotion of urban transportation. So urban transportation is through metro rails and Namo Bharat rails. All right. Now, if you look at these graphs, you can see a lot of focus of government in increasing the infrastructure of India. So a lot of increase in the capital expenditure, as you can see here. Sorry, here. FDI has increased. You can see individually national highways काफी बढ़ रहे हैं. Cargo traffic at major ports has increased. Electrified railway routes has increased. Aircraft movement has increased. Number of airports has increased. So a lot of focus on increasing the capacity and infrastructure of the country, because अगर infrastructure बढ़ेगा तो obviously that will have multiplier effect on the Indian economy. The Indian economy, the size will grow also. A lot of employment will be generated, which is a big focus for the government. Now, next, how does the government plans to ensure inclusive development? For this, the government has taken up the initiative of aspirational district program, which is program to assist states for faster development, and it also includes a lot of provisions for employment generation. Right. So if you look at the numbers in this graph, the percentage of women registered for antenatal care within first trimester has increased. So many women are now going to these institutional hospitals during pregnancy. Now this leads to a lot of increase in health indicators, right, of that region. If you look at the number of enrollments under Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana, now many people have started taking insurance. So again, this leads to increase in health indicators. Now within the health sector, the government has number one, encouraged cervical cancer vaccination for girls age 9 to 14. Now the awareness of cervical cancer in India is very low, and therefore the government has started this initiative. The next is the Saksham Anganwadi and Poshan 2.0 schemes of the government to expedite the nutritional delivery, early childhood care, and development of the pregnant mother, lactating mother, and newborns. Right. Then you have the UWIN platform, which is the Universal Immunization Program platform of the country. Through this app, there is effort to increase immunization under Mission Indradhanush. Then the health cover under Ayushman Bharat has also been increased and now includes all ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers, and helpers. Right. Now, to promote housing, the government has initiated Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, where the government is very close to achieving the target of 3 crore houses for the poor, and it aims to achieve an additional target of 2 crore houses in the next 5 years. Now, the government has also announced a scheme for housing for middle class to promote middle class to buy or build their own houses. नेक्स्ट इज टूरिज्म. यहाँ पे हम सारे स्टेट्स को encourage किया जा रहा है that they develop the iconic tourist centers that are there in the states to attract businesses. Also, that will help in promoting opportunities for local entrepreneurship. Right. For this purpose, a long-term interest-free loans has been given to states. Recently, India also hosted the G20 meetings. So these G20 meeting, various G20 meetings were conducted in various parts of India. And usse the India was able to showcase its diversity to a global audience. Right. Now, there are also projects in line for port connectivity, tourism infrastructure, and amenities in the islands of Lakshadweep and Andaman and Nicobar. A lot of Lakshadweep was in news very recently, so a lot of focus there. Now, next is agriculture and food processing, another major focus area of the government. Now, here the government is promoting investment in post-harvest activities, both private and public investment, so that post-harvest losses are reduced. There is more value addition to agriculture produce. Another initiative is application of NanoDAP, which is a specialized form of diammonium phosphate, which will be expanded to all agroclimatic zones. Then another initiative is Atmanirbhar Oilseed Abhiyan, right? It is a strategy to achieve self-sufficiency for oilseeds. Then another scheme that is to be formulated is for development of dairy in the country. The government is also implementing the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana to enhance aquaculture productivity. And the government aims to double the exports, generate more employment opportunities in this sector. For this, the government is also setting up five integrated aqua parks. This effort toward increasing the aquaculture or fishes or other sea produce is also known as Blue Revolution. And as you can see, has been a lot of increase in the allocation for Blue Revolution. Now, the government also wants farmers to turn from farmers to agripreneurs, or they want farmers to take up food processing activities for their agriculture produce, right? For this, the government initiative is Pradhan Mantri Formalization of Micro Food Processing Enterprise Scheme. So allocation for that has also increased. So as you can see, a lot of focus on agriculture and food processing. Okay, well, that is it for the budget. If you need any guidance with respect to Indian economy, then you can follow me in these social media and also check out my book, The Indian Economy Handbook, which is right now available for free. You can download it from the UPSCprep.com website, or it is also available on my Telegram channel. Thank you.